Hi, Nadine. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Can you pronounce your last name for me? I just want to make sure I have it right.
Yeah, it's soccer, like the sport.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. So we're just waiting for Erin and for Dawn. And
Perfect.
then I know that Dawn had some slides that she wanted to use. I don't know if you have any slides.
Yeah, I also have some. I was wondering, I've never shared my screen on Zoom, so I'm wondering, let's see how to do it.
So I did say that multiple participants can share. So
Okay.
Why don't we, yeah, I just want to test it out to make sure.
Perfect.
No, you don't have to be co-host or host to share, although I can change that up.
Okay, so let's see. Oh, open system preferences. Hang on.
Hi, Dawn.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you.
Thank you. Of course, we're about to have a big thunderstorm, so I've got my background up so we don't see the trees and what's blowing behind me in my home office.
No
So
problem.
can you guys see this? I'm just making sure it's like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm going to stop sharing and then we can switch
Yeah,
over.
then Dawn, if you want to test yours as well.
Let's see. You got it?
Great.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, it's in preview mode though. You don't want it that way. We got the setting, but I can fix that. Hold on. Let's see. I'll just done.
Here we go. Hi, Erin.
Hi guys, how are you?
Good.
Hey,
Good to
how are
see
you?
you.
Dawn, nice to finally meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
So I don't know, Erin, do you have any slides that you want to show?
I don't.
Okay, great. So they were just testing out the screen sharing and making sure it works.
Always good to try and test that out beforehand.
Yes, you never know, so it's better.
It's always awkward, especially when Mercury's in retrograde.
So Dawn, you may want to move your screen a little bit down.
Okay.
Like,
Oh, you know what? It's on books. So. Sorry.
No problem.
My husband does a podcast from in here.
Oh, nice.
That's
But
cool.
that's the only time he uses this desk, and because he says I've taken over the room during the pandemic, and it's true. That's true. I have to own that. But he always puts it up on the books, so I thought, well, I should do that too. But
I love that. What kind of podcast does he do?
he does the House Highlights podcast for the Maryland House of Delegates.
Cool.
Yeah.
Exciting stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it was something he started doing leading up to the start of the legislative session in Maryland last year, and then kept going during session. And they took a brief break, but then they decided, it was actually kind of a cool thing and a good thing to do. So let's keep it going year round as much as possible.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel like we are in the age of podcasts now. So
Yeah.
I feel like everything
Yeah,
has
for
been
sure.
turned into one.
I mean, I know it's on Spotify,
Mhm.
and I, mostly I hear it because I'm in the kitchen while it's happening.
Right.
But I know that it streams on Facebook Live too.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Yeah, I feel like I get a lot of my news and interesting stories from podcasts where I'm like, oh, this crazy thing happened or whatever it is. So I love that. That's great.
So are you all set? Can I start letting people in, or would you like a few more
Sure.
minutes? Okay.
I'm good to go.
That's fine.
All right. Great.
I'll probably
So-
just mute until you tell me it's my turn to talk because
Sure.
I create
No
background.
problem.
Mhm.
All right. Hi, everybody that's coming in. I know we have a few people who are here, so welcome, and we'll get started in a few minutes. So just to the presenters, just so you all know, in the order. So I'm gonna invite, let's see, Dawn to speak, and then Nadine, and then Aaron. Does that work? Okay, great. And I'm gonna give a little introduction for each of you at the beginning, just using the bios that you sent me originally. And the questions were fine? If I use those questions, that's fine. Okay, great. Well, it's not storming in DC yet. I don't know how it is in Maryland, or other people are.
It's black and
Oh,
noisy here in Montgomery County.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I hear the cicadas. They're very loud here. You can feel free to talk amongst yourselves. Welcome to people who are just arriving. And we're going to start in just a minute. I just see a few people kind of coming in, so I figured I'd just wait just another minute or so. So while we're waiting, I would be curious, there are some names here that I know, but some names that I don't recognize. And I'm just curious, I'd be really interested to know how you heard about it, how you heard about this event, if you've been to other IFC events before, or if this is your first one.
Hi, I've been to a few events over the years and would like to get involved in more. Anyway, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you.
Hi, we are currently in Chautauqua, New York, which is in the western corner of New York State, but we normally live in Denver, Colorado, and we're part of the Interfaith Alliance there. And I'm sorry, I said the wrong one. The
We have
Interfaith Alliance is
multiple nonprofits.
the Abrahamic Initiative in Denver. Sorry, thank you. And we're interested to see what other organizations around the country are doing. So we're here to participate and learn from you all and hopefully gain some new wisdom.
Wonderful.
Thanks
And
for
how did,
letting us join.
absolutely, how did you find out about it?
I'll pass that over to my colleague, Johanna Woodrow.
Hello from Denver, Colorado.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. We reached out to your organization because it looked like we had similar values and mission, and got to speak with Anne. She told us about this event, so we're happy to be here and learn along with you tonight.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's great to have you. And that's the advantage of doing things on Zoom, that we can have people from all over. So, so that's great. All right, so I'm just gonna let this person in and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Hi, Kevin, good to have you.
Glad to be here.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started, and people may join us along the way. So I'd like to officially welcome everybody to our panel discussion this evening. My name is Simi Ram Reimer, and I am the Outreach Director for the Interfaith Council of Metropolitan Washington, or as we like to shorten it to, IFC. I'm very pleased to be joined this evening by Erin Wilson and Nadine Sacker from the Attorney General's Office of Washington, D.C., and by Don Ludke from the Attorney General's Office in Maryland. Before I introduce them, I do want to just take a minute to talk a little bit about the work that the IFC does. We are over 40 years old, and we are made up of 11 different historic faith traditions, both from the Eastern and Western faiths. While we are based in DC, our office is in DC, we work closely with partner organizations and congregations throughout the region, so including Maryland, Virginia, and DC. Our mission is to create an inclusive community of diverse faiths in our nation's capital that is focused on the values that unite us and the distinctions that make each faith unique. We work towards this goal primarily by creating interfaith programming that bring people of different faith traditions together through a variety of ways, including formal dialogues, more informal conversations, panel discussions such as this one, arts programming, and more. And if you would like to be on our mailing list and find out more about the programs that we do and other initiatives that we have throughout the year, I'll put that link in the chat, and we would love for you to join us at future programs. Before we begin the discussion this evening, there are two events that I want to mention that are coming up that may be of interest. One of which is online and one of which is in person. So the virtual event, which hopefully will be our last virtual only event, is our annual Interfaith Bridge Builders Award, which honors leaders from faith communities in the region. And that will be held on Sunday, June 6th at 4 p.m. And I'll put more information about that in the chat as well. And the second is our annual Unity Walk. The Unity Walk is a wonderful opportunity to visit different houses of worship along Massachusetts Avenue in upper Northwest DC, and to learn more about the faith communities and to show our support for the diversity of faith communities in our area. We typically get between 700 and 900 participants every year, and we hope to bring that many, or maybe more, because people want to come out and be with other people in person this year. This year's walk will be held on Sunday, September 12th in the afternoon, starting at 1 p.m. And I hope you will consider joining us for one or both of these programs if possible. So now I would like to introduce our wonderful speakers. First, we have Dawn Ledka from the Office of the Attorney General in Maryland. She graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in 1996 and from the University of Maryland School of Law in 2000, where she served on the Maryland Law Review, the Moot Court Board, and as a member of the mock trial team. She served as the first law clerk to the Honorary Lynn A. Battaglia, Maryland Court of Appeals. After 12 years in private litigation practice, Dawn joined the Office of the Attorney General in 2013, where she serves as counsel to the Maryland Center for School Safety, the Maryland Longitudinal Data Systems Center, an active assailant interdisciplinary work group, and works on hate crimes and hate bias community outreach initiatives and law enforcement training. Erin Wilson is from the Office of the Attorney General in Washington, D.C. She has extensive policy, legislative, analytic, and interagency experience in the U.S. government's executive and legislative branches, including Capitol Hill, NCTC, state, DHS, DOD, and is a leading expert in the field of countering hate and violent extremism. For nearly 20 years, she drove U.S. government policy goals related to preventing hate, violent white supremacy, and other forms of extremism while promoting civil rights and racial and social justice. She currently serves as the director of People vs. Hate, Standing Up for Humanity, D.C. Attorney General Carl Racine's presidential initiative to counter hate during his tenure as president of the National Association of Attorneys General. She also serves as a senior policy advisor on efforts to counter hate and further racial and social justice in the district. And lastly, we have Nadine Sacker, who is an assistant attorney general in the civil rights section of the Office of the Attorney General for the District of Columbia. She received her JD from American University's Washington College of Law, her MA from American University School of International Service, and her graduate degree from Tulane University. She joined OAG after clerking on the Superior Court of the District of Columbia. All of these biographies will be also accessible on our website, and I will provide a link to that as well. And so just before I turn it over to our first speaker, I just ask that all attendees please leave your microphone muted during the presentations. If you have questions that come up during the course of the presentations by our panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat. There will also be time for Q&A from participants in the second part of the program. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Dawn.
Thank you. While I'm getting my screen ready, I note that I ended up getting to go to Colorado recently. I went to Denver, which was awesome. And I was able to partake of Voodoo Donuts, which was fantabulous. So you guys have some great places to go and see things out there. It was truly enjoyable trip. So I'm Dawn Ludke from the Office of the Attorney General, and I'm going to give you just a brief overview. Are you all able to see my screen? You can just give me a thumbs up that it's working. Okay. an overview of sort of what our laws are here in Maryland and what our policies are and why we're doing what we're doing and how we partner with our federal counterparts to assist in this arena. So first, one of the biggest things that comes to mind typically when we're dealing with constituents or citizens is whether the things that happen, the actions or words which happen, are they hate bias, which is protected hate speech, or is it a threat? Does it rise to the level of criminal activity? And so our policy and the training that we do when we are doing community outreach is to explain whatever it is. You don't need to make that determination yourself. You should, in fact, be reporting it. And we have multiple methods in which to engage folks, and we'll talk about that and the why some communities may go to law enforcement and why others may avoid going to law enforcement, but where they can get alternative assistance if they are hesitant to report directly to law enforcement. So in Maryland, our protected classes include race, color, religious beliefs, sexual orientation, gender, disability, national origin, or homelessness. And we did just add this legislative session, gender identity. So that goes into effect on July 1st, I believe. And specifically, the new definition for gender identity, which we've added to our statute, is included there in the bold print that you see at the bottom of the slide. That was actually taken from another portion of existing law in Maryland in our health article related to medical care, and then cross-referenced into our criminal code. We do, of course, have a statute that protects the damage of the religious property, damage to property of a religious entity, including places of worship, cemeteries, schools, educational facilities, community centers, and the adjacent grounds related to them. And obstructing the exercise of religious belief. These are very akin to some of what you see in the federal hate crime statutes. And then in the 2020 legislative session, you can see I've underlined where it says motivated either in whole or in substantial part by. That was in addition based on a case that happened in College Park, Maryland, where the University of Maryland main campus is located. This relates to the case of Lieutenant Richard Collins III, who was a student at another university, participant in the ROTC program, a bright young African-American who was out with some friends in the University of Maryland College Park area and was assaulted and killed by an individual who had a lengthy digital history of all manner of hate, but also particularly targeting African-Americans and women and Hispanics in the digital footprint that they were able to find within the defendant's evidence. In any event, at that time, because our criminal law did not allow for whether the crime was committed, motivated either in whole or in part by, they weren't able to bring hate crimes charges against that individual. So the Collins family and our state lawmakers worked hard to get that changed. And this language you see before you is the resulting change that happened in 2020. Same, they've added gender identity into the statute to cover any of the damage to a building that's used by a particular group. So let's say it's a school building, but on a Sunday, the school building is used or rented out for the auditorium to a particular religious group, for example. That's not a case where it would be obstructing access to an education, but it is one that is obstructing access to the practice of religious beliefs or damage to the building. This one was also added in 2020, and it prohibits the affixing of a symbol of hate to the real or personal property of another. When we write things like including noose or swastika. It's not limited to a noose or swastika, but it is impossible to capture all of the many different symbols of hate that we have. And you would have to change the statute book every year in order to keep pace with what happens. So they chose 2 that are readily identifiable by most individuals to use as examples of a symbol of hate. And it applies both to public property as well as private property, real or personal property. So you can't affix it to someone's vehicle, for example, without the express permission of the owner or occupant if you have the intent to threaten or intimidate any person or group of individuals. And this year they added the little part that you see at the bottom, subsection C. As a part of criminal sentencing for a hate crime, the court may now require anti-bias education program for the defendant to participate in that program. That has to be developed by the University of Maryland system, and they must have that in place, I believe, by January 1st, 2023. So they have a little bit of time in order to write what that anti-bias curriculum is going to be and how it will work. But that's one example of that. Currently, though, within certain jurisdictions in Maryland, local law enforcement departments have developed that sort of a restorative approach that they've been deploying on their own without a statutory provision for it, because it's effective in helping to repair damage within a community. So for example, Anne Arundel County Police Department, which is where our state capital is, Annapolis, that police department has been deploying that for several years now successfully in using that more restorative approach as practice. And we are unique in Maryland that we have a reporting statute for police officers where if they receive a call where there's evidence that there may have been an incident of either hate bias, meaning didn't necessarily rise to the level of criminal conduct, or a hate crime, each local law enforcement department needs to report that to the Maryland State Police. The Maryland State Police, in conjunction with the Maryland Coordination and Analysis Center, which is our state federal law enforcement fusion center, and it's where I am based, produces a report every year that's issued to the public. And quarterly, they provide data to the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. So they work collaboratively together. They have different classifications. I'll go through what they are. So some of the incidents are classified as verified, some are inconclusive, and some are unfounded. Very few are unfounded. So I'm going to say that most of what gets reported to law enforcement and then goes up to state police to be included in this form get classified as either verified or inconclusive. So some of the work that's being done across the state with law enforcement training is to explain how to document better what's happening, what kinds of questions to ask in order to understand and ascertain whether or not there's a bias motive to the underlying criminal conduct, and to help build community relationships between the community and the local law enforcement department so that there is that incentive to report, because we know, much like the feds experience, statewide reporting is never truly indicative of what is actually happening. So we know that hate bias and hate crimes incidents are in fact underreported and have been for years. We're doing our best to try and fix that and find other ways to improve that. The reason why it matters, and the reason why I think Maryland's policy of capturing not just hate crimes, but also hate bias incidents is so important, is because if you know that a particular area is experiencing an uptick in bias incidents, it might just be words, right? Words still have an effect. They are demonstrative that there's a problem within the community. That allows the opportunity for government leaders, for the local law enforcement to put together some de-escalation, right? Before things rise to the level of a crime, you want to be able to go in and do some proactive work. So that's one good reason for that. The other is to determine patterns over time. Is something growing, or is it emanating from the schools? Is it a problem that's both within the community as a whole and also within the schools? And I note that over the past 10 years of the annual state report on hate bias and hate crimes, anywhere between 25 to 35% of the incidents that do get reported either involve as the perpetrator or the victim our school-aged population. And when I say our school-aged population, I mean anywhere from kindergarten up through age 25, because I'm also including in that range our undergraduate population, so higher ed as well. But that's a significant amount of young folks who are engaging in or being the victims of hate crimes. So there's greater opportunity for intervention. So some other resources, as I mentioned, the FBI Baltimore field office has 2 supervisory special agents in their civil rights unit, both of whom I get to work with on a regular basis, and they're amazing. And they will help they go out and help local law enforcement when they are investigating. They can help with victim services. They also tend to look at things through a slightly different lens than perhaps local law enforcement, particularly if the local law enforcement is not accustomed to dealing with hate crimes, right? So something that an ordinary officer might just look at as, well, that was a second-degree assault. They're going to dig a little bit further, and it's not necessarily that they're going to take over the prosecution of the matter, but they may look at it through a different lens, partner with local law enforcement, and help them figure out what the best options are for the prosecutor. The Office of the Attorney General, our Civil Rights Division, has a whole webpage there where we've got some helpful information on combating hate bias within your community. We also run a hate crimes reporting hotline through the Office of the Attorney General, and all that information is available on that web link. And again, the Maryland Coordination and Analysis Center, I put the link to the most recent hate bias report. There is a serious lag in when that gets published because there's a lag in the data getting up to the state level and then aggregated. So the next one for 2020 will come out right around Labor Day. It usually comes out right around Labor Day. But they have all of them for the past 10 years on there. And in the most recent report, they did include one of the charts includes a 10-year snapshot. So with that, that's my contact info, and I know we have other folks to turn this over to, so I will switch off my screen sharing. Just a moment. Hold on. My bar went away. Nope.
All right. Well, thank you, Dawn, so much. And I see that there are already questions popping up on the chat, so I'll save those until the latter half. But thank you so much for giving us this overview. And now I would like to turn it over to Nadine. And I know you're figuring out the screen sharing piece of it, so just hold on, everybody. But
Nadine, are you able to unshare mine? Because
let me see. I can try that. Let's see.
I was gonna say my whole toolbar disappeared.
Is mine sharing now?
No.
Oh, wait a minute. I see it. I got it. Okay.
Wait, can we see mine or should I reshare it?
You're good.
Okay. All right. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Nadine Soccer. I'm an attorney in the DC Office of the Attorney General's office in the Civil Rights section. I'd like to start out by just thanking CIMI and the Interfaith Council for having me to speak today about this. I think hate crimes is such a very relevant topic, unfortunately, and also one that I think these conversations need to be had around. I think education and just kind of knowing what's out there is kind of the first step to combating hate in your communities. So I really appreciate you providing this platform for us to talk about it. So I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about what our office specifically is doing related to hate crimes. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of my office and the Civil Rights section in particular. So we're a relatively new section. We were started in April 2019, although the DC Office of the Attorney General has been in the civil rights field, for years prior to that, but our actual section was formed specifically in 2019. And we have a goal of ensuring equal treatment under the law, particularly combating discriminatory policies and, as we're talking about today, hate crimes. So that's kind of our main focus. And to kind of start that process, we hosted some civil rights listening sessions in July of 2019 to hear from our community about what concerns they had related to civil rights and their own rights. And one of the themes that we heard during those talks were actually related to bias-related crimes and hate crimes, particularly from the LGBT community. A lot of people felt like they were getting discriminated against or had bias-related crimes committed against them based on their gender identity. As Don just mentioned, Maryland added that, and that is something that we're very concerned about. So that was something that we definitely heard from our community. So the main way that we kind of ensure the equal treatment of people in the district is by enforcing the DC Human Rights Act. This is actually one of the most expansive civil rights legislations in the country, and we protect 21 traits. So this is all the traits that are protected under our act, and they apply to 4 main categories. So housing, employment, education, and public accommodations. So that's a pretty big and broad statute that we have, and that's the main form of litigation that we do. But related to that, we also have these bias-related crimes. So there is a bias-related crime statute, and I think the main thing that we would want to focus on is like who is kind of protected under this and what acts are attributed to the conduct, right? So like what does a person have to do to basically commit a hate crime against you, and who is protected under this statute? So I'll talk about that in a minute, but what I do want to note is that this is this code is a criminal statute that we have, but it's rarely used because of just the level of motivation that a prosecutor would have to demonstrate at trial to kind of get the actual crime to rise to the level of a bias-related crime. So that is an issue that we've seen in like the actual prosecution of bias-related crimes. And that's something that our office specifically noted. And in 2020, we've tried to get this civil action authority, which I'll talk about later. It was recently just was enacted last month, which is very exciting for us. So I'll go into that a little bit more, but that's kind of our solution to the difficulty of prosecuting it in the criminal context. So definitions. So the actual crime defines what a designated act is, and basically to commit a bias-related crime, you have to commit a designated act, and it has to be based on the actual or perceived race, religion, national origin, sex, age, marital status, personal appearance, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, family responsibility, homelessness, disability, matriculation, or political affiliation of the victim. So it's a long list of traits that we protect. So again, a pretty expansive definition. And then, okay, there we go, it's not working. So here's what the acts are. So these tend toward more violent crimes is how I would describe it. So arson, assault, burglary, injury to property, kidnapping, manslaughter, murder, rape, robbery, theft, or unlawful entry, and attempting, aiding, abetting, advising, inciting, conniving, or conspiring to commit all of the above. So the actual criminal bias-related statute focuses a lot on the actual conduct that's happened, whereas I'll talk about it a little bit more in the civil context. It's a little bit more expansive. So it tends to protect people a little bit more. So let's talk about the civil action one. So we basically wanted to ensure that residents could be protected in another way. So this was kind of our solution to that. And it grants the Attorney General authority to bring these actions on behalf of people who may not want to bring a lawsuit on their own. And it allows our office to bring it on behalf of the district. So as I noted a little bit earlier, the amendment was drafted to not only address violent acts, but also other forms of intimidation or deprivation of other rights under the Constitution. So it's a little bit more expansive. The people it covers is similar to what we just listed out. So it's the same categories of people that are covered under the bias-related crime statute that we were talking about, but it's just in the civil context. So same expansiveness. The conduct is where it's a little bit different. So it does incorporate the definition of a bias-related crime that we just talked about, but it also includes violence, force, fraud, or intimidation, and the interference of somebody's exercise of any of their rights or the deprivation of somebody's rights. So examples of that, so a violent offense or intimidation to interfere with a person's right to vote, or throwing rocks or other projectiles at demonstrators engaging in free speech. Those are just two acts that might not necessarily be included under the bias-related crime, but actually could be included under this civil authority that we have. Okay, so basically our goal to bringing these cases is to really get injunctive relief, which includes training. We really want to base that around restorative justice principles, so including education and training and just ensuring that the behavior not only stops, but is also kind of corrected in the future and preventing it from happening again. We also incorporated a civil penalty scheme into the statute. So that would allow us to get civil penalties to the district, and OAG always seeks actual or nominal damages for whoever the victim was of the crime. And when it's appropriate, we will seek punitive damages as well. So those are the end goals of our lawsuits under this authority that we have. And it's the main goal of the civil rights section to be bringing these cases, especially now that we have this authority. What I will note is that because DC is this weird municipality, but federal zone, a lot of the actual criminal enforcement is actually done by the US Attorney's Office rather than the DC Office of the Attorney General, which is yet another reason why we sought this civil action authority, because it allows us to kind of enforce the rights of, you know, all these protected classes and ensure that bias-related crimes and hate crimes don't really occur without necessarily stepping on the US Attorney Office's toes in the criminal context. If you or someone you know is a victim of a crime, please contact the authorities first. But if that happened to happen in the DC area, there are two ways that you can let us know about it. You can send us an email at oagcivilrights@dc.gov, or you can fill out an intake form at this website right here. Oops. Uh-oh. And we also have on our website, the People versus Hate Initiative, a lot more information related to that. And I also included a link for resources for survivors of hate crimes, which I will send this presentation to Simi so she can distribute that to everyone at the end of this. But I'll allow Erin to speak more about the People versus Hate Initiative now. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Nadine. And I will put the link to that website in the chat as well. And hopefully, as Nadine said, she'll send me the slides that she used, which I can send around. And Dawn, perhaps if you could do the same so that everybody can have a chance to examine them and share them at your leisure. So now I'd like to turn to Erin.
Great. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much to Simi and the Interfaith Council of Metropolitan Washington for the invitation to be here today and for hosting this important conversation. I hope this is the first of many conversations that we all have on this together, especially talking about the rise in white supremacy and the rise of hate in our country. Faith groups really are the cornerstones of our society, providing us with community identity and purpose. Three things that I'll continue to talk about, and we'll maybe even share an anecdote about when we get to Q&A, but things that I'd also argue are critical to living our lives with that sense of clarity and satisfaction, and things that are critical to building resilience to hate and practicing with compassion and empathy, and why faith communities really are invaluable partners in our efforts to reduce hate in our society. So there's no softening this here, but we really have a significant problem with hate in our country, and it's trending in the wrong direction. And I can send a bunch of stats to you earlier, but I'll read a few to you very quickly here. And the first is that in 2019, every year the FBI puts out an annual report on hate crimes. And in 2019, it's always a year behind. But what it showed just from that year alone is that it was the deadliest year on record at 51 for hate crime murders. We know that anti-Semitic incidents remain at a very high level. And in fact, during the 2 weeks in May at the height of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, we saw an increase in 75% of incidents in the first 2 weeks in May, anti-Semitic incidents in the US. We know that white supremacist propaganda is also at an all-time high. That doubled in 2020. And unfortunately, we have some bad stats for the DC metro region. In DC, that increased from 19 to 30. And these stats are according to ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. In Maryland, they increased from 50 to 163. And in Virginia, they increased from 138 to 249 in 2020. So Virginia and Maryland round out the top 10 for most incidents of white supremacist propaganda. And of course, you can't talk about COVID in the last year without talking about the increase in hate and propaganda against the AAPI, or Asian American and Pacific Islander community. And really the best resource for tracking that has been Stop AAPI Hate. And they tracked nearly 7,000 incidents of hate, ranging from things from verbal harassment to assault against the AAPI community from March 2020 to March 2021. And of course, then there were the attacks in Atlanta that led to 8 deaths as well. In the district between 2015 and 2019, we saw that hate crimes tripled. They have decreased in the past year and a half or so, but we judged that that was largely due to the pandemic. And the MPD does a great job of Metropolitan Police Department. Apologies, we've been in government too long, so we all speak in acronyms. So feel free to raise a hand or interrupt me and yell at me if I list acronyms that you're not familiar with. But the Metropolitan Police Department on their homepage does a great breakdown of the various stats and what motivated these crimes, or what the perpetrators said they were motivated by. In DC, as my colleague said before, sexual orientation, race, and ethnicity are the primary targets individuals perceive to have to be other based on that. For sexual orientation, race, and ethnicity are the primary targets of hate crimes, hate incidents in the district. And these, of course, are just the incidents that we know about. I believe it was Dawn who talked about the dearth in data that we have for a variety of reasons, either survivor reluctance to support, law enforcement failing to support. But if we don't understand a problem, we can't really work to fix a problem. And of course, when we talk about the district, we also have to note the ugly displays of hate that come from the outside. I believe the FBI has assessed that 90% of people involved in the attack against the Capitol were not from the area, which is probably not a surprise to anyone, but that isn't yet another impact that district residents must deal with. And of course, in December, just before that, we had 2 historic Black churches affected by hate groups and targeted and attacked by hate groups in DC. So we know that these affect district residents' feelings of safety and community, and their just ability to live their daily lives. If any of you were down around K Street during that time, you know that all of these local businesses have shut down, that some of them still are boarded up to this day. So you may be asking yourselves, why is this happening now? And for some it's obvious, for some it's really confusing, but it's really a combination of factors, of things that really created a perfect storm. I think with COVID, we saw increased sense of isolation. Again, going back to this sense of community, a lack of community and more time online. And sometimes that was the only community that, especially youth, but we've also seen an increase in people in their 50s following some of these more extremist things that we've seen online. And what may surprise some is that the majority of Americans believe in conspiracy theories. About 80% of Americans believe in some theory that isn't based in scientific data or is contrary to it. And about some of these may seem silly, and some of them are definitely more extreme. And about 15% of Americans right now believe in QAnon. So we have seen that with COVID, people also felt this sense of crisis or a crisis point in their lives, maybe health, maybe financial, maybe both. And also contributing to it, I feel like I could go on for days, but the last thing I'll say is narratives. Both political and social narratives have mainstreamed hate. And really, when I, in a previous role, I looked at extremist narratives worldwide, particularly ISIS and Al Qaeda. But what all extremist narratives have in common is they identify a problem, they identify a common enemy, they identify that the solution to that is violence, and they identify a crisis point. And we're seeing that again and again, even in our political narratives, even in our social narratives. So it's no surprise that when people during COVID had more time online, more sense of isolation, a lack of community identity and purpose, that really this was a fertile ground for extremists to use narratives that have become mainstream and encourage people to kind of go through that radicalization to violence process. So of course, our office, the Office of the Attorney General, is committed to countering hate in all its forms and promoting social and racial justice. And my colleague talked about some of the main ways we do that by protecting district residents and also advancing legislation to strengthen those protections. But Attorney General Carl Racine also wears another hat. He is president of the NAG, and the NAG, it's an awful acronym, is the National Association of Attorneys General, which all 56 attorneys general belong to. And it's a nonpartisan organization, and each year they elect a president. And the president, it gets to choose an issue that they believe is of national importance around which to convene the attorneys generals for a year. So he chose countering hate and named his initiative The People v. Hate, because attorney generals see themselves as the people's lawyer, and standing up for humanity. So the goals really are to increase awareness, increase prevention of hate, and then support individuals who have been impacted by hate, both in the immediate aftermath of a hate crime and then communities who have been historically impacted by hate. And I'll just break down, go through each kind of pillar or theme really, really quickly, and then we'll move on from there. But awareness, again, is as I mentioned before, right now with the lack of hate crimes data, if we don't understand a problem, it's really difficult to funnel resources or to prioritize resources to fix it. And so he has convened the attorney generals and been a strong advocate for the No Hate Act, which somebody actually mentioned in the questions already, that was just passed. And because of his advocacy, he was actually invited to the White House as President Biden signed into law just a few days ago. And that's a really exciting act because it will provide, right now it's an authorization. We still need appropriation. So there needs to be funds behind the authorization, but it allows for grants to go to state and locals for them to develop awareness programs or to switch to, this gets really nuanced quickly, but the FBI has a reporting system, basically a computer system that they use, and they switched it a few years ago. And state and local law enforcement, the majority still haven't made that switch to the new system. So they're having a hard time even reporting the information. But the data provides all sorts of incentives, that's hard for me to say, incentives to encourage state and local law enforcement to increase that reporting. So we have a better understanding of what that looks like, and the better communication with communities, including hotlines to help communities increase their reporting as well. Another thing that he's done is just looking at the different types of hate that are out there. So for instance, most people have heard of white supremacy extremism. Most people haven't heard of incel violence. And incel violence stands for involuntary celibates. That's a name that this group of people gives themselves. And it's men, in short, it's men who blame women for kind of the lack of success they've had in their lives. And at its basic form, it's misogynistic. At its most extreme, they're bent on killing women. And there have been numerous incidents in the United States that men who self-identify with this incel ideology have killed women. One of the best reports I've seen on it is actually an ADL report, but another good example is a woman down in Florida named Maura Binkley, who is 23 years old, University of Florida college student, and was killed. She was in a yoga studio, and a guy came in and shot up the yoga studio and killed her because he believed in this ideology. So anyway, just going back to raising awareness about, there are these growing types of extremism in our country that many people aren't even aware of, and we're used to keeping them in neat little typologies, but we're also seeing a blending of all these different extremisms as well. So the second pillar is really focused on prevention, because we know that all these countermeasures will only ever be a Band-Aid if we actually don't focus on prevention. So for this really means focusing on the rise of online hate and misinformation when we have so many people believing in these extremist narratives. So one example of one thing that our office did is, in the wake of the Capitol attack, we know that Facebook was targeting weapons and tactical gear advertisements to known extremists. So AG Racine and some other attorneys generals contacted them immediately and asked them to stop doing that ahead of the actual inauguration. Another area of prevention is starting as young as we can and focusing on our youth. So our office created an Artists v. Hate, going along with the People v. Hate theme, to give youth an opportunity to use art to convey messages of racial and social justice and countering hate, and to help them find a voice in all of this. And lastly, the last pillar is support, because we want to support those communities who have been, again, impacted by hate, in individuals and communities in an acute sense after, for instance, a hate incident or a hate crime or an attack, but also those communities that have been historically impacted by hate. So AG Racine, just a few weeks ago, May 4th, hosted, almost a month ago tomorrow, but hosted a national convening with members from advocacy members and community members from across the country, members of the White House, really, you name it, anybody involved in the AAPI space and advocacy space was there to talk about and to learn about how this was a public forum, learn about how the AAPI community has suffered hate back from things like Japanese internment until now with COVID, and to talk about what we can actually do to prevent that and to support the Asian American community. And in that event, I can send Simi the links after this so we can share all these resources online, because they're such great resources and they're still out there. And another one that we did through the National Association of Attorneys General, the NAG, was we hosted a survivors event, including Rabbi Myers from the Tree of Life Synagogue, Susan Breaux, the mother of Heather Hare, who was run down by a violent white supremacist in Charlottesville, Virginia a few years ago, Pradeep Kaleka, whose father was killed in the Oak Creek temple attack, and lastly, Jeff Binkley, the father of Maura Binkley. We hosted an event with them to talk about what do survivors need after an attack, what can we do to move the ball forward to ensure that we're supporting individuals and survivors in the short term, but a long term as well. So that's a really quick rundown of the things that we're working on and we're doing, but we're really so appreciative of today's event, because we really want to raise awareness about the different forms of hate that are out there, both acute, institutionals, and our programs and our policies, and then how we all have a role to play in most importantly, in many ways, the faith community. So thank you so much, Simi, and I'll turn it back over to you.
You're still.
Yep. Thank you so much, Erin. It's certainly sobering, the statistics that you shared with us, but important for us to hear and to try and figure out where we can go from here and how we can be engaged with your initiatives or other initiatives. So I'd like to start asking some questions. I know I had questions prepared, and then some of those questions are actually questions people are asking in the chat. So I'm just going to kind of launch into those. I'm also mindful of the time. So one of the questions that has come through the chat is, what has been some of the outcomes of restorative justice approaches? Is that something that your offices are engaged with? And what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I think just in the broader sense, there is a general trend toward restorative justice principles. I think that this data has shown that it's a really effective way to kind of not just deter the behavior, but stop it from happening again in the future. So I think that's obviously the goal of any of these laws that we have in place, is to make sure that, we don't have to use the law later on. So I think that the restorative justice principles are very useful in actually achieving that goal. Dawn, I'll let you speak to that as well if you'd like.
Yeah, I was going to just discuss it in the context of our schools, because of course, restorative approaches as a whole is mandated statewide in Maryland currently. It's been implemented in different phases in different school systems, and certainly COVID interrupted a lot of implementation and training on different things. But one of the things that we teach both our school resource officers, and we go out and teach administrators and school security staff, is, these are teachable moments. So yes, we're talking to you about the hate crimes, and yes, we do want you to document them, and we do want you to if there's graffiti or something's going on, or there's a bullying complaint, but there seems to be a hate bias motive behind it, it doesn't mean that we want the child arrested. It means this is a teachable moment. And also, you need to understand the kid wasn't born hating. So what's going on in the home? Is there a need for some sort of intervention, or look at what else might be going on there? And the teacher may not know, but the teacher may report that. Law enforcement may take that and say, oh, here's what else we know is going on. Or, oh, these are other issues that we're having either in that neighborhood or at that house. And you can do some other interventions with the child to make sure they're supported and they're learning from this experience too. And that has been very positive, and that has been very helpful, I think, for I've noticed, especially in the work I get to do in the schools, and we have a program we teach called Healthy Communities, Healthy Schools, to help students feel more empowered and to help them understand the impacts of some things which might just be words or a text message or a Snapchat, and what the long-term impact could be for someone on the receiving end of that. And it's been incredibly positive, and actually makes me feel really good about the kids. And the kids understanding and accepting the message and the need to be an upstander instead of being a bystander. And so I can say that our youth tend to be very receptive to that message and find it extremely important.
That's great. And so to kind of continue on that note of positivity, we heard, especially from Aaron, we heard some disturbing statistics and data. And since many of us on this call are from faith communities or engaged in with faith communities, I would like to know if there's a role that faith communities can play in trying to prevent this rise in hate crime that we're seeing. What is some of the work that's happening now? What are some things you might like to see happen in the future? What can people who may not be clergy, for example, but lay leaders or just very active in their community, what can they be doing?
So some interesting statistics for all of you that come from research that both academia and the federal government have done together, is that in cases where there's been a lone actor who's committed an attack in the US, 80% of the time there was a bystander, but less than 50% of those bystanders actually said something. So the same with well, I won't get into specific attacks, but anyway, that's a phenomenal number, right? I mean, could you imagine if that other 50% had actually said something? So I think, and then in other cases that we've seen in the US, specifically with religious institutions as well, or places of worship, often when a person has voiced a very extreme narrative or ideology, they've been kicked out of that faith institution. And instead, those individuals have instead gone online to find that echo chamber, to find people who will support them. So I'd say for clergy, for faith communities, have the tough conversations, because sometimes, frankly, you're the only ones that can have that conversation. You're the only ones that can reach those people, especially if we're talking about violent white supremacy. But also if you're not having that conversation, someone else will. And I think it's even equally as important today to realize that what we consider fact isn't necessarily recognized as fact anymore. For some reason, that's debatable. So I think to the extent that we can all encourage critical thinking and checking of sources and realizing that people are actively trying to manipulate all of us, the more we can protect our youth. And then just lastly, being that safe place for people to come and talk to and share their feelings with. We actually had a separate category for people who ended up reporting of faith leaders, because that category it was family, then it was friends, then it was stranger, and then it was faith leaders. Because that was one of the groups of people that we saw that bystanders were willing to come to the most. So you do have a very, very critical role to play in this, whether it's just having a conversation about critical thinking or being a safe place for someone to go to report a crime.
Great, thank you.
Some people they have nowhere else to go, and faith-based communities are typically thought of as the open door. Right. And many faith-based communities are also locations or spaces for other community gatherings that may not be affiliated specifically with a religious service, but the building, the house of worship itself is viewed as central to the community. So I know you guys mentioned the walk that's taking place in September down in DC. We hear, so I live right off New Hampshire Avenue, or this segment where we call it the highway to heaven here and it's wonderful and it's amazing and it's architecturally fascinating and just full of history and culture, and what a great place. But you know what? Not everybody has that. And not everybody has that level of variety within their community too. And the instinct seems to be to fear that which you do not know, whatever it is. And it may be a religious group, it may be the LGBTQ community, if you're not familiar with that community. And the instinct seems to be to put up a wall. So anything you can do as a human to break down that wall and say, well, why do you feel that way? Or do you know, have you ever gone to? What do you know about that? Let's talk and show that you're not going to get angry at them, because that's not going to get anybody anywhere, but be receptive to having an actual conversation. The ideology hopping for people who end up taking violent action related to hate bias of some kind happens constantly. You'll find these folks have meandered from one thing to another. So they may have been an incel and then they've meandered and now they are going to commit an anti-LGBTQ crime. It's all over the map. But what is consistent, whether you're talking about hate crimes or whether you're talking about active assailant incidents that are not hate-based motivated, that may just be in one particular area and not associated with a house of worship or what have you, they're lone wolf actors, but they all had a grievance, and they all had a grievance that they could not let go of. So it's important when you see someone expressing grievance for whatever reason to listen and to take it seriously and to see what you can do to help. And if you don't think you yourself can help, where might you be able to obtain help for that person, or who should you let know? And that's important, to not discredit that gut feeling that you get. You won't necessarily get someone in trouble for something, but you should let someone know.
We have a question here, and this, Dawn, was in your presentation when you were talking about the hate symbols, and you mentioned the noose.
Yes.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and then you also mentioned the swastika. And so there's a question here that's saying, how is it determined whether the use of the swastika is in fact a hate crime or is being used as a religious symbol, because it is also used as a religious symbol in certain faith traditions? And is it discretionary to each officer to decide, or are there guidelines provided in anti-bias training? And can those guidelines be found?
So there, I mean, it's the typical, what is the intent, right? It's no different than intent in any other criminal investigation. It doesn't have a special methodology for dealing with it in this case. You are right. The swastika is in fact a symbol used in certain religious ceremonies. But it would not be being used in a religious ceremony and then affixed or attached to someone else's real property or personal property with a threat to intimidate them, right? So if you were using a swastika, or even if you're using the swastika because you're having an educational program, right? And you're displaying it, or you're not attaching it or affixing it. You're not going and sticking, you know, a noose in someone's tree in their front yard of an African-American family. You're not burning a cross at the front entrance of a predominantly African-American housing development, right? A cross in and of itself is not a symbol of hate. It's what you've done with it and the why of what you've done with it. So that's what is looked at when you're investigating a hate crime base that would potentially be charged under 10305.1.
Thank you. So there's also a question about, could you elaborate on the other groups committing hate crimes other than white supremacists? And I know that several different groups have been mentioned, and I don't know, I think it would be helpful if there's a way to differentiate between which of those groups consider either consider themselves to be white supremacists or considered from outside entities to be considered white supremacists, if there's, you know, and if there are other groups as well.
Sure, I can jump in for the first part of that. There are dozens and dozens of groups that are out there. And I think it's important to know that the federal government and state governments generally don't have lists of good groups and bad groups. But what we do generally do is put, sounds funny, but you know what I'm saying. We put there's almost like categories of extremist ideology. So there's like the FBI will say there's racially motivated violent extremism, and underneath that box they have white supremacy extremism. Then they have what they sometimes call black supremacy extremism. Then they have anti-government extremism, that would be like militia and other groups like that. They have abortion and environmental, and then they have this specific kind of ideologies or isms underneath that. But if you're actually looking for groups that are in your area, SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, has an interesting hate map where they map out the different groups. I would say that the government generally probably wouldn't have the same list. Their criteria is different. Of course, it comes from the position of an advocacy group, but it will give you a really good idea of what groups are in your area, with some, at the very least, tending to be more extreme beliefs. And then also ADL has something very similar as well. They also have a hate map. So both of those resources, I think, are great kind of private or open source or private sector resources of what's out there to see kind of who's in your area.
So then there's also a question here saying that is DC also experiencing delays in data collection and analysis? And can legislators mandate local law enforcement to prioritize this recording?
So the MPD website actually updates a little bit more frequently than what Don was mentioning and what Aaron mentioned with the FBI reporting, but there is always going to be a delay with reporting, right? That's not something that you can really work around, just especially when you want accuracy in particular over just like the raw numbers that they might be having. But I do think that is something that like legislators could look into, seeing if it's something that could be done more quickly or reported more frequently or whatever it might be. But that is always kind of, there is always going to be a delay to get kind of accurate numbers and reports.
And ours was they did switch the timing of one piece of it, but that the report is still just an annual report. So there is information sharing that happens internally with law, with the state police and the Maryland Commission for Civil Rights and their work together, but that's not put out publicly. That's only done on an annual basis.
I'll just add that the DC, this is from my own point of view, I think the DC Metropolitan Police Department is really great at putting up quarterly data and making that public. Most states don't do that. Right. And not all states actually put together annual reports as well. So I think our states are doing a pretty good job of making that information it's a state in my mind, but are making that information as transparent as possible.
And I think when you're collecting data from 160 around different law enforcement departments, it makes it a much different task than, having a single law enforcement unit, right? I mean, yeah. It would be awesome, but we don't even have single law enforcement units in like a single county here. So it's very challenging.
All right, well, at this point, I would like to open it up. I know that some people put questions in the chat, but if other participants have questions, you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask them. No? Okay, so I have another question for you then. I'll jump in. So there's a question about what roles, if any, are there for faith communities and leaders in the sentencing process? If a faith community has a religious perspective that shapes their understanding of justice, to what degree can district attorneys, judges, et cetera, take that into consideration?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just completely discretionary at kind of the judge level. What they want to take into consideration. I think particularly if the faith community was a target or victim of the crime, that's definitely, I think their input would be welcomed. I think you'd be pretty hard pressed to find a judge that would not allow that. But again, it's really dependent on kind of the judge's court. They kind of run the whole thing, but Dawn, I'll let you speak to that as well.
Yeah, no, I was talking with one of my federal counterparts about that question last night, and the answer we both had was, well, there really isn't a role. I mean, unless the faith-based community was itself the victim. Now, how do you define the victim, right? Because if there's an anti-Jewish attack that occurs and affects, and it, of course, by nature, the stress and the trauma response is much wider than the individual victim, even if there was one single victim. But unless it was something that occurred at that property, right, or like the Tree of Life attack, they would not, in fact, be involved in that. Now, because the faith-based community may have ongoing relationship and supporting the victim and the victim's family, they may, in fact, be able to have input, but it would be through the victim. So the prosecutorial unit or the investigative unit would work with the victim and the victim's family during the investigatory phase, and then the prosecutor during the prosecutorial phase. And there are different victim services groups that assist on both ends of that. But they would only be working with the victim themselves and their family.
All right. We do have a question here. How will the new federal hate crime bill change data collection or any other activity in Maryland? Will the federal grants incentivize with any new approaches?
So right now, our data collection at the state level is broader than the existing federal collection. I'm not familiar with whether, I know that there's federal funding within the new bill that would trickle down and allow for grants to be issued to local law enforcement departments, as you stated, with respect to upgrading to better do the federal reporting with the new federal system that they have. But what the feds collect is more narrow than what we collect in Maryland. So, I would see the grants being used for doing community outreach, for expanding training, We expanded our training mandate in Maryland for sworn law enforcement in the 2020 session. So all new officers and all existing officers are required to have a hate crimes, hate bias training program as a part of either your initial training in the academy, and then every 3 years thereafter. That has to be certified by the Maryland Police Standards Training Commission. They have to take an exam at the end of it and pass it with a score of 75% or better.
All right. I see we just have a few minutes left before we wrap up. Are there any other questions that anybody else would like to ask? All right, and so to our panelists, is there anything else that you would like to offer before we end?
Just thanks for having me. It's been great to participate.
Yes, thank you very much. And we, whether it's our office or whether it's our FBI field office, are happy to come out and do presentations for different faith-based communities for our schools. And, whether it's emergency planning for faith-based communities in terms of active assailant events, we do that. We talk specifically about hate crime, so we can tailor it to fit your particular community's needs.
Wonderful.
I'll just echo that again and say thanks so much for having us. And Simi, I'll send you some links to resources to distribute after this. And particularly, we haven't really talked about physically protecting houses of worship, but there's a lot of great federal grant opportunities there as well that we can kind of give you context to.
Yes, that would be great. And I will just say we have done protecting houses of worship events in the past.
Oh, perfect.
And we do get information about upcoming grants from Department of Homeland Security. So I'm happy to send that information around. We'll probably put it in our weekly e-blast. So if you sign up for that, you'll see information about that. But otherwise, I will definitely be sending around the information that I get from Dawn and Nadine and Erin. And then I think you can follow up with them if you have any further questions. So on that note, I would like to thank again everybody for coming. I hope to see you at future IFC events. And thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for really providing very important information and a lot for us to think about in our roles in bringing down the trends of hate crimes and what we can do to make that happen. So thank you again and have a great evening, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.